The auction hammer rose above Red Hollow's town square like an executioner's axe. Hannah Cole stood on the rough pine platform, her son Eli heavy in her arms, while the auctioneer's voice carried across the crowd. Widow Cole's debts stand at $300. Mine company's willing to take her on contract. Hannah lifted her chin, fixing her gaze on the distant mountains. The faded blue calico dress, her last decent one, caught the morning wind. Eli reached for her hair ribbon, his small fingers tangling in the brown strands that had escaped her careful pins. The crowd pressed closer. She recognized faces: Mrs. Morrison from the Mercantile, the banker who'd refused extension, neighbors who'd once shared her table. Now they watched her reduction to property, to numbers in a ledger. At the crowd's edge, a lone rider sat motionless on his horse, his weathered Stetson pulled low against the sun. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Luke Bennett hadn't meant to stop at the auction. He'd ridden into Red Hollow for winter supplies: salt pork, coffee, ammunition for the coming season. The crowd gathered in the town square was an unwelcome obstacle, nothing more. Then he heard the auctioneer's practiced pitch about honest labor contracts and debt redemption. Through gaps in the crowd, he glimpsed the platform. A woman stood there, back straight as a fence post, holding a small child. The morning sun caught the yellow flowers on her faded dress. $300 of debt, the auctioneer continued, his voice carrying the false sympathy of a man who'd performed this duty too often. Mr. Garrison's representative has offered to assume the debt in exchange for a 5-year contract. The widow would work the company boarding house. The child would... 500? Luke's voice cut through the crowd like a blade through cloth. He hadn't planned to speak. The words had emerged from some deeper place, the same instinct that had once made him pull his sister Sarah from a flooding creek. Heads turned. The Garrison man, a thin fellow in a checked vest, spun around with obvious irritation. The bid stands at 300, 500 cash, for both. Luke nudged his horse forward, the crowd parting reluctantly. That clears the debt and leaves them free of contract. The auctioneer's hammer wavered. Sir, this is highly irregular. Luke swung down from his horse, his boots hitting the packed dirt with finality. He pulled the leather pouch from his coat, its weight substantial. Nothing irregular about cash money. At the platform's edge, he began counting. Gold double eagles gleamed in the morning light, $20 pieces saved from 3 good cattle drives. Silver dollars followed, each one hitting the auctioneer's table with a distinctive ring. The woman, Hannah, the auctioneer had called her, watched him with eyes the color of strong coffee. Neither grateful nor suspicious, just carefully observant. The child in her arms had stopped fussing, transfixed by the golden coins. That's 500 even, Luke said, pushing the pile toward the auctioneer. Draw up the papers. The crowd murmured. The Garrison man protested about prior arrangements and proper procedures. Luke ignored him, accepting the pen from the auctioneer's reluctant hand. His signature was careful, deliberate. Lucas J. Bennett, Sage Creek Ranch. When he looked up, Hannah Cole was still watching him, still holding herself with that unbending dignity that had stopped him in the first place. The buckboard wagon waited beside the platform, its iron-reinforced wheels already loaded with Luke's supplies from Morrison's store. Hannah stood uncertain, holding Eli and a small cloth bundle, everything she'd been allowed to take to the platform. Your belongings, Luke said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. Where are they? Pritchard's boarding house. She shifted Eli's weight. A trunk. Nothing more. He nodded and moved off without further words, leaving Hannah standing beside the wagon. The crowd had begun to disperse, though she felt their eyes following her, heard their whispers carrying on the morning air. Mrs. Morrison paused nearby, seemed about to speak, then hurried away. Luke returned carrying a battered trunk on his shoulder, handling its weight as easily as a sack of flour. He placed it carefully in the wagon bed, then turned to face her. For a moment, they stood there, the transaction complete, but the next step unclear. Front bench, he said finally, gesturing beside the driver's seat. It's a full day's ride. Hannah's surprise must have shown. She'd expected to ride in the wagon bed like cargo, like property. Instead, she climbed up beside him, Eli settling against her chest. The bench was worn smooth from use, and she could smell the leather and wood oil, the faint scent of tobacco from Luke's coat. They rode in silence through Red Hollow's main street. Hannah kept her eyes forward, though she knew faces appeared at windows, watching the strange procession. The banker's wife stood outside the postal office, her expression unreadable. The minister tipped his hat to Luke, not to her. Once beyond the town limits, the landscape opened into sagebrush and grassland. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already showing the white promise of coming winter. The wagon wheels found their rhythm on the rutted road, and Eli's eyes grew heavy with the constant motion. "There's food," Luke said, his first words in an hour. He indicated a woven basket tucked beneath the seat. "Coffee in the canteen." Hannah found cold biscuits, dried beef, 2 apples that still held their crispness. She ate carefully, aware of Luke's peripheral attention though he kept his eyes on the road. When Eli woke hungry, she broke a biscuit into small pieces, feeding him while balancing on the swaying seat. The sun climbed toward noon, then began its descent. The road wound through a valley she didn't recognize, following a creek lined with cottonwoods. Luke handled the team with unconscious skill, his hands steady on the reins, occasionally clicking his tongue to encourage the horses up a grade. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they crested a rise. Below, tucked into a bend of the creek, sat a collection of buildings, a solid log cabin with a stone chimney, a barn that looked recently reinforced, smaller outbuildings she couldn't identify. Smoke rose from the chimney in a straight line, indicating someone had banked the morning fire. "Sage Creek Ranch," Luke said, the first note of something pride uncertainty coloring his voice. Hannah studied the scene below. It was isolated, miles from the nearest neighbor she could see, but the buildings were well maintained. The split rail fences straight and true. Garden plots lay fallow near the house, their geometric patterns still visible. Someone had cared for this place once. Someone had made it a home. Luke guided the wagon down the final slope as the sun touched the mountain peaks. The ranch dog, a large mixed breed, emerged from the barn, tail wagging but maintaining distance, waiting for Luke's signal. "His name's Bear," Luke said. "He's good with children." It was a small offering, this piece of information, but Hannah recognized it for what it was, an attempt to ease her concern, to make this strange transition less frightening for Eli. She nodded her acknowledgement as they rolled into the yard of what would be, for however long, their new existence. The cabin door stood open, waiting. Luke had left it that way this morning, not knowing he'd return with 2 souls whose lives had been measured in dollars and contracts. Now he pulled the team to a stop, set the brake, and climbed down. He didn't offer to help her descend somehow, understanding she needed to make this choice herself, to step down from the wagon under her own power. Hannah gathered Eli closer and descended carefully, her feet finding the packed earth of the yard. The air smelled of sage and creek water, wood smoke and approaching evening. Behind them, the mountains caught the last light, turning golden red like the coins that had purchased this moment. "Welcome to Sage Creek," Luke said simply, already moving to unhitch the team. Hannah stood in the gathering dusk, Eli drowsy in her arms, and wondered what kind of man paid $500 for strangers' freedom, then welcomed them to his home with such careful distance. The cabin's open door seemed to wait for her decision. She took a breath that tasted of sage and possibility, then walked toward it. Hannah woke to unfamiliar silence. No boarding house bells, no footsteps overhead, no muffled arguments through thin walls, just the distant sound of creek water and a meadowlark's morning call. Eli stirred in the small bed beside her, his breath warm against her arm. The room Luke had given them sat just off the kitchen, small but clean, with a proper bed instead of the straw tick she'd expected. A washstand held a china pitcher and basin, and someone had hung muslin curtains at the single window. A woman's touch, though the dust on the windowsill suggested these touches were old ones. She dressed quickly in her second dress, a brown wool that had seen better days, and lifted Eli from the warm blankets. His weight felt lighter each day, despite her efforts to keep him fed, perhaps here, with regular meals. She stopped that thought before it could form fully. This arrangement remained undefined, temporary despite Luke's purchase. She wouldn't let herself plan beyond the present day. The kitchen was empty but warm. Luke had already stoked the massive, majestic range. A pot of coffee sat on the back burner, and she poured herself a cup, savoring the luxury of real coffee after weeks of chicory and stretching grounds. The larder door stood ajar, and she investigated, finding shelves lined with preserves, sacks of flour and cornmeal, salt pork wrapped in cloth, dried beans in glass jars, well-stocked but disorganized, as if someone had been maintaining supplies without much thought to system. She heard boots on the porch and quickly moved away from the larder, not wanting to seem presumptuous. Luke entered, carrying an armload of split wood, his coat dusted with morning frost. "You're awake," he said, seeming surprised. "I usually—" "Coffee's there if you want it. I found it. Thank you." She hesitated, then asked, "What would you have me do?" He set the wood in the box beside the stove, taking his time with the arrangement. "I didn't buy you to— That is, you're not." He stopped, removed his hat, ran a hand through hair that showed silver at the temples. "I suppose we should talk about that." Eli chose that moment to demand attention, reaching for the tin cups hanging from hooks near the stove. The clatter broke the awkward moment. "Let me fix breakfast," Hannah said, grateful for the distraction. "Then we can discuss arrangements." She found eggs in a covered crock, bacon in the cold box, and day-old biscuits that would do for toasting. Luke watched her navigate his kitchen with an expression she couldn't read: surprise, perhaps, or something more complex. "Martha kept things different," he said suddenly. "My wife, she had a system for everything." He gestured at the larder. "I just buy what I remember we used to need." Hannah cracked eggs into the cast-iron skillet, the sizzle filling the silence. Martha, a wife, past tense. That explained the curtains. The china, the garden plots going to seed. "How long?" she asked carefully. 4 years come December. Fever took her and our boy. Samuel was about Eli's age. The word sat heavy in the warm kitchen. Hannah understood now the empty spaces in this house, the careful distance Luke maintained, the impulsive rescue at the auction. She'd seen that look before, in her own mirror after the mine collapse. They ate breakfast in companionable quiet, Eli making a mess with his eggs that Luke didn't seem to mind. When the plates were cleared, Luke stood, retrieving his hat. "I need to show you around," he said. "So, you know where things are." And the tour was methodical, practical. The smokehouse with its supply of cured meat, the root cellar built into the hillside, lined with shelves of potatoes, turnips, onions, the chicken coop where 24 hens provided eggs, the barn with its small dairy cow, 4 horses, and equipment maintained with obvious care. "The milk cow's name is Buttercup," Luke said, showing a flash of embarrassment. "Samuel named her." In the barn's tack room, Hannah noticed something else: a shelf of books. Unexpected in this utilitarian space. Agricultural journals. A worn Bible. Novels by authors she recognized. Luke followed her gaze. "Winter evenings get long," he said by way of explanation. They returned to the house as the sun climbed higher. Luke showed her the parlor, rarely used judging by the dust covers on furniture. Here, more evidence of Martha embroidered samplers on the walls, a sewing basket beside a rocking chair, a child's wooden horse abandoned in the corner. "I haven't—" Luke started, then stopped. "I just closed this room." Hannah understood. Some griefs were too large to face daily. That evening, after a simple supper of beans and cornbread that Luke praised more than it deserved, they found themselves in the kitchen's warmth. Luke worked on a harness that needed mending while Hannah darned stockings she'd noticed in a basket by the door. Eli played on a rag rug near the stove, stacking wooden spools Luke had given him. "You don't have to do this," Luke said suddenly, gesturing at her sewing. "The mending and such. You're not a servant here." Hannah's needle paused. "Then what am I?" The question hung between them like smoke from the oil lamp. Luke set down the harness, his hands still for the first time all day. "I don't rightly know," he admitted. "I saw you on that platform. Saw them treating you like livestock at auction. It wasn't right. A person shouldn't be reduced to dollars and cents. Yet you paid for me. I paid to free you. There's a difference." Hannah resumed her sewing, considering his words. "Most men would expect something for $500. I'm not most men." His voice carried no pride, just fact. "You can leave whenever you want. I won't stop you. But winter's coming, and town's a hard place for a woman alone with a child. So maybe we just see how things go. You help where you feel comfortable. I provide room and board. No contracts. No obligations." It was more than she'd hoped for, this offer of dignity along with shelter. "And if I choose to help with the household, the cooking and mending, then I'd be grateful. Lord knows I make a poor job of it alone." Hannah tied off her thread, examining the neat darn. "Your coffee's good. About the only thing I haven't ruined." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Martha used to say I could burn water if left unattended." The kitchen settled into comfortable quiet again. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. The stove ticked as it cooled, and Eli's breathing deepened toward sleep. Hannah lifted her son, his small body heavy with exhaustion. "I'll help with the household," she said quietly. "It seems a fair arrangement." Luke nodded, returning to his harness work. As she carried Eli to their room, she heard him add, "The garden needs attention, come spring. If you're still here, if you want to." If she was still here, if she wanted to. The possibility of choice, of wanting rather than needing, felt foreign after months of desperate survival. She tucked Eli into bed and stood at the window, looking out at the unfamiliar landscape silvered by moonlight. Somewhere in this quiet house were the ghosts of Luke's losses. In her arms each night was the weight of her own. But perhaps, in this strange arrangement born of impulse and compassion, there might be room for something beyond mere survival. Tomorrow she would organize the larder. She decided. Create a system that made sense. It was a small thing, but it was a beginning. The rhythm established itself without formal declaration. Hannah rose before dawn, finding Luke already gone to tend the stock, coffee waiting on the stove. She'd prepare breakfast biscuits from the sourdough starter she'd found neglected but still viable. Eggs gathered fresh, bacon or salt pork depending on what needed using. Luke would return as the sun painted the mountains pink, washing at the pump before settling at the table with a quiet morning that had become their daily greeting. 3 weeks had passed since the auction, and the strangeness had faded into routine. Hannah knew now that Luke took his coffee black, preferred his eggs over easy, and would eat anything she cooked with the same appreciative nod. She'd learned the house's patterns which floorboards creaked, how to coax the temperamental oven damper, where the morning sun would warm the kitchen first. This morning, she watched through the window as Eli toddled toward the chicken coop, the gathering basket comically large in his small hands. Luke emerged from the barn and fell into step beside the boy, shortening his stride to match Eli's unsteady gait. They'd developed their own routine, these two Eli helping with morning chores while Hannah prepared breakfast. "Careful now," Luke's voice carried through the still air. "Henrietta's broody. She might peck." Eli's response was unintelligible but earnest, and Hannah saw Luke's rare smile as he lifted the boy to peer into the nesting boxes. Something loosened in her chest at the sight, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. She turned from the window to find the kitchen drawer slightly open, the one she'd discovered last week, containing bundles of letters tied with ribbon. Sarah Bennett. The return address read, "From somewhere in California, Luke's sister," she presumed. She'd closed the drawer quickly then, respecting the boundary. But curiosity lingered. A man who saved his sister's letters was a man who valued connection, despite his isolated life. The morning proceeded with its now familiar pattern. After breakfast, Luke returned to his work today, repairing a section of fence the wind had damaged. Hannah kneaded bread, the rhythm soothing, while Eli played with Bear on the porch. The dog had appointed himself the boy's guardian, tolerating tail pulls and clumsy hugs with patient dignity. Around noon, she noticed Luke hadn't come in for the midday meal. She found him still at the fence, having removed his coat despite the cool air, his shirt damp with effort. He'd been working harder lately, taking on projects that seemed to have waited years. The barn door rehung, the loose corral rails reinforced, the woodpile growing mountainous. "You missed dinner," she called. He straightened, wiping his brow. Lost track of time. She'd brought a plate covered with a dish towel, cold beef, bread, pickles from a jar she'd found in the cellar. He accepted it with surprise, sitting on a nearby stump to eat while she lingered, uncertain why she'd stayed. "You're working yourself hard," she observed. "Winter's coming. Things need doing." "They needed doing last winter too, I imagine." He paused mid-chew, considering this. "I suppose they did. What's different now?" The question hung between them. Luke set down the plate, his hands resting on his knees. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "House doesn't echo as much," he said finally, "with voices in it again." That evening, Hannah discovered Luke could whistle. She was mending one of his shirts the third this week. The man was hard on clothing when the melodic sound drifted from the porch. She recognized the tune Shenandoah, mournful and sweet. Through the window, she could see him whittling something from a piece of pine, bare at his feet, the last light fading behind the mountains. The whistling stopped abruptly, as if he'd caught himself in the act. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. Eli had discovered the wooden blocks in a box beneath the parlor window, remnants of another child's play. Hannah had hesitated when he'd found them, watching Luke's face for pain, but he'd simply said, "Samuel loved those. Built whole cities with them." Now Eli constructed elaborate towers, narrating in his half-language while Hannah worked. Luke had taken to sitting nearer the lamp these evenings, his ledger work somehow requiring proximity to their small circle of activity. The ranch books, she'd noticed, were meticulously kept neat columns of figures tracking cattle, expenses, profits, a successful operation, despite its owner's solitary existence. 20 heads sold to Fort Collins, Luke murmured, more to himself than her. "Good price this year." "You run this place alone." "Hire hands for roundup and drives. Rest I manage." She thought of the work required, the constant repairs, the animals' daily needs, the business of buying and selling. No wonder he looked tired, shoulders bent with more than grief. "Mama, look," Eli demanded, showing his tower. In his enthusiasm, he knocked it over, blocks scattering. His face crumpled toward tears. "We'll build it again," Luke said before Hannah could respond. He set aside his ledger, lowering himself to the floor with careful movements. "Even better this time. See strong foundation first." Hannah watched them reconstruct the tower, Luke's large hands patient beside Eli's clumsy ones. Her husband had loved their son, but he'd been a man of quick temper, little patience for childhood's slow pace. This careful guidance was something new in Eli's experience. Later, after Eli slept, Hannah found Luke on the porch despite the cold. She brought 2 cups of coffee, offering one silently. He accepted with a nod, making room on the bench. "I found wild herbs today," he said unexpectedly. "Down by the creek. Sage, mostly. But some thyme, too. You mentioned needing herbs for cooking." She had mentioned it, once, a passing comment about the bland seasoning options. He'd remembered, made note, acted on it. "Thank you," she said, meaning more than just the herbs. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars emerge in the clear sky. The coffee warmed her hands through the tin cup, and somewhere an owl called, receiving an answer from across the creek. "My husband," she said suddenly, surprising herself. "Died 8 months ago. Cave-in at the Garrison mine. They brought him home on a board." She paused, gathering words. "The debt started reasonable funeral costs, doctor's bills from trying to save him. But interest mounted, and the company store prices. Mrs. Pritchard let me work for room and board, but it wasn't enough." Luke didn't respond immediately, and she appreciated the space he left for her story. "The auction," she continued, "was almost a relief, an ending, at least. And now?" She considered the question, watching her breath mist in the cold air. "Now I'm not sure what this is." "Maybe that's enough," Luke said. "Not being sure, better than being certain of something awful." It was an odd comfort, but comfort nonetheless. They finished their coffee in companionable quiet, neither acknowledging the shift that had occurred from arrangement to something unnamed but warming, like the coffee in their hands, like the light spilling from the kitchen window behind them. When Hannah finally rose to go inside, Luke added, "The herb garden was Martha's, south side of the house. It could be restored, if someone had the inclination." She paused at the door. "I might have the inclination." "Ground thaws in April," he said, returning his gaze to the stars. "Fair warning, it's considerable work. Most worthwhile things are—" She left him there, whistling softly again, the tune following her into the warm kitchen where tomorrow's bread was rising and Eli's blocks waited in their rebuilt tower, standing firm against the night. The storm announced itself at breakfast with mare's tail clouds streaking across the mountain peaks. Luke stood at the window, coffee cup forgotten in his hand, reading the sky with the literacy of a man who'd spent 20 years learning nature's alphabet. "Early for this kind of weather," he said, more to himself than to Hannah. "Big one coming, maybe by afternoon." Hannah had learned to trust his weather predictions over the past month. He could smell snow 2 days out, feel pressure changes in his bones like an old man, though he couldn't be more than 35. She watched him calculate, his mind already listing preparations. "I'll need to bring the horses in, cover the well, secure anything loose." He set down his cup decisively. "Might want to fill everything that holds water. Could be a day or two before it passes." She nodded, already mentally cataloging her own preparations. How bad? Bad enough. He was already reaching for his coat. These early storms hit hard, not like proper winter ones that build slow. Through the window, Hannah could see the clouds darkening, moving faster now. The temperature had dropped overnight, frost thick on the fence rails despite yesterday's mild afternoon. Eli played near her feet, unaware of the approaching danger, content with his wooden horse and small soldier Luke had carved last week. Luke headed for the barn while Hannah began her own storm preparations. She filled the zinc wash tub, every pitcher and pot, even the good china teapot she'd found wrapped in cloth. The lamp reservoirs needed topping off. She did that next. Careful with the kerosene. She brought in extra wood, stacking it high beside the stove, then checked the pantry supplies. Through it all, she could hear Luke working outside, the bang of stall doors, the protest of horses being moved, the steady hammer as he secured loose boards. Bear paced nervously, whining at the door, his animal instincts alert to atmospheric change. By noon, the wind had picked up, sending dust devils dancing across the yard. The temperature continued dropping, and Hannah could see Luke's breath clouding as he wrestled with the heavy wooden covers for the well. She heated coffee, brought it out to him. "Nearly done," he said, accepting the cup gratefully. His hands were red with cold, the knuckles already chapped. "Just need to check the chicken coop latches and bring in more wood." The first fat raindrops hit as they worked together to haul in the last armloads of split pine. Within minutes, the drops became sheets, then turned to sleet, hammering the roof like thrown pebbles. Luke slammed the door against the wind, both of them breathing hard. "Made it," he said, water dripping from his hat brim. The house shuddered as the storm found its full voice. Wind screamed around the corners, searching for weaknesses. The windows rattled in their frames despite the storm shutters Luke had wrestled closed. Hannah lit lamps against the premature darkness, their yellow glow creating a circle of warmth in the kitchen. Then the chimney began to smoke. Downdraft, Luke said, already moving. Winds shifted. Smoke billowed into the room, acrid and choking. Eli started crying, and Hannah scooped him up, moving toward the hallway where the air was clearer. Luke grabbed the poker, adjusting the damper while she wetted cloths at the pump. "Here," she said, pressing a cloth to his face while holding another over Eli's nose and mouth. They worked in concert, Luke fighting with the stove mechanics while Hannah held a blanket to create a barrier, directing the smoke toward the window she'd cracked despite the storm. It took 20 minutes to resolve, both of them coughing, eyes streaming, but finally the smoke cleared. The wind had shifted again, and the chimney drew properly. They collapsed at the kitchen table, Eli still whimpering against Hannah's shoulder. "Well," Luke said, voice hoarse. "That was excitement we didn't need." Hannah surprised herself by laughing a short, exhausted sound. "I was just thinking we hadn't faced any proper crisis together yet." Baptism by smoke. He managed a slight smile, his face still streaked with soot. "You handled it well." The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She rose to dampen another cloth, approaching him with maternal instinct. "Hold still. You've got soot everywhere." He submitted to her ministrations, sitting uncommonly still as she cleaned the black marks from his face. She was close enough to see the lines around his eyes, the scar through his left eyebrow, the way his hair curled slightly behind his ears where it needed cutting. When she realized she'd been wiping the same clean spot repeatedly, she stepped back quickly. "There," she said, unnecessarily brisk. "Better." The storm raged through dinner, through the evening, showing no signs of abating. The temperature had plummeted, and even with the stove blazing, cold seeped through the walls. Luke brought out buffalo hides he'd stored, spreading them over the chairs, creating a smaller space to heat. "We'll need to stay in here tonight," he said, pragmatic as always. "Bedrooms won't hold heat in this." Hannah understood the necessity, but the thought of spending the night in such proximity unsettled her. They'd maintained careful boundaries these past weeks, separate spaces after dark, polite distance. Now the storm forced them together, into this circle of warmth and lamplight. After Eli fell asleep on the makeshift pallet she'd created near the stove, wrapped in every blanket she could find, an odd quiet descended despite the storm's violence. Luke sat in his usual chair, but closer now, the furniture rearranged for warmth. Hannah took her own seat, picking up mending from habit more than necessity. "This reminds me," Luke said suddenly, staring into the stove's glow through the open grate, "of the winter Martha and I got snowed in for a week. First year here. We'd built the cabin but hadn't chinked it proper. Snow blew through the walls like flour through a sifter." Hannah let her hands still, recognizing the offering of memory. She hung every blanket we owned to create one warm corner. We lived in that corner for 6 days, playing cards, telling stories. She read the entire book of Psalms aloud, twice. His voice carried wonderment, as if surprised by the sweetness of the memory. "I learned more about her in that week than in our whole courtship." "How did you meet her?" Hannah asked carefully. "Church social in Denver. She was visiting her aunt. I was there buying cattle. Spilled punch on her dress." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She said any man that clumsy needed looking after. We married 4 months later." Thunder crashed overhead, making them both start. The house groaned but held. Luke rose to check the windows, ensuring the shutters remained secure. "Samuel came a year later," he continued, his back to her as he peered through a crack in the shutters. "Perfect from the start. Martha's eyes, but stubborn like me." He paused. "The fever took them both in 3 days. Doctor couldn't do anything. I buried them under the cottonwood by the creek, where Martha liked to read in summer." Hannah set aside her mending completely. "I'm sorry." 4 years this December," he said, returning to his chair. "Some days it feels like yesterday. Others, like another lifetime. They sat in companionable silence, the storm a third presence in the room. Then Luke asked, "Your husband, what was he like?" Hannah considered how to answer. James was complicated. Good intentions but quick temper. He loved Eli, loved me in his way, but the mining life wore on him. The darkness, the danger. He drank more toward the end. She paused, choosing honesty. The day of the cave-in, we'd argued about money, about leaving the mines. Last words between us were angry ones. Guilt's a heavy burden, Luke said simply. Heavier than grief sometimes. Yes. The wind howled, rattling something loose on the roof, probably a shingle. Luke made note of it. Another repair for his endless list. Hannah noticed him rubbing his shoulder, the one he favored when tired. Old injury, she asked. Horse threw me, years back. Aches in weather like this. Without thinking, she rose, moving behind his chair. My mother knew something for that. She placed her hands carefully on his shoulder, feeling the knots through his shirt. May I? His stillness was answer enough. She worked carefully, finding the tension points, pressing with practiced knowledge learned from years of easing her mother's headaches. Luke's breathing deepened, the tight line of his shoulders gradually softening. A particularly loud crack of thunder made her jump, her hands pressing harder than intended. Luke inhaled sharply, and she felt him tense, but not from pain. The moment stretched, charged like the storm air, until she stepped back. Better? Her voice came out oddly breathless. Yes, thank you. He didn't turn around, and she was grateful her face felt hot despite the room's chill. She returned to her chair, picking up the mending with hands that trembled slightly. Neither spoke, but the silence had changed, become something waiting rather than resting. The storm continued its assault through the night. They dozed in their chairs, taking turns feeding the stove, checking on Eli. Once, around 3 a.m, Hannah woke to find Luke placing another buffalo hide over her shoulders. Tucking it carefully, she kept her breathing even, feigning sleep. But through her lashes saw him stand there a moment, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't read in the dim light. When dawn finally came, weak and gray through the continuing storm, they were both awake, sharing coffee and exhausted companionship. The house had survived. They had survived. And something between them had shifted like the wind, dangerous, potentially devastating, but also possibly the change they both needed. Storm's breaking, Luke observed, studying the lighter sky to the west. Should clear by afternoon. Hannah nodded, already missing the strange intimacy the crisis had created, the permission it had given them to lower their careful guards. But Eli was stirring, the day's routines beckoning, and the boundaries would rebuild themselves with the improving weather. Still, as Luke smiled at something Eli babbled upon waking, she thought perhaps those boundaries might rebuild a little lower, a little less rigid than before. The morning after the storm dawned crystal clear, the world transformed by ice that caught the sun like scattered diamonds. Hannah stood at the window watching Luke teach Eli how to hold a whittling knife, their breath clouding in the cold air of the porch. The boy's small hands were wrapped around the handle, while Luke's larger ones guided each careful stroke. Away from yourself, Luke instructed patiently. Always cut away. That's it. They were making something simple, a wooden spoon. It looked like, but Eli's concentration was complete, his tongue poking out slightly as it did when he was focused. The sight stirred something in Hannah's chest, a warmth that had been building since the storm 3 days ago. Everything felt different now, though neither she nor Luke acknowledged it directly. Their movements around each other had gained a consciousness, an awareness that hadn't existed before. When their hands accidentally touched passing dishes at dinner, both pulled back as if burned. When Luke entered a room where Hannah was working, he paused at the threshold, seeming to recalibrate his presence, and Hannah found herself checking her hair in the small mirror more often, pinning it more carefully, though she told herself it meant nothing. We're low on supplies, Luke announced at breakfast the next day, not quite meeting her eyes. Need to make a town run before the next storm. I can manage here, Hannah said quickly. You go ahead. Actually, he cleared his throat. Might be good for you to come. You'll need winter things cloth for warmer clothes, heavier shoes for you and the boy. Makes sense to have you choose them yourself. The practicality of the suggestion didn't mask the significance. Going to town together, being seen together, would make a statement to the community. Hannah understood this, saw that Luke understood it too. If you think it's best, she said carefully. I do. The 20-mile ride to Red Hollow took 4 hours with the wagon. Eli sat between them on the bench, excited by the adventure, chattering about everything he saw. His innocent presence eased the tension, gave them something to focus on besides their proximity. As they neared town, Hannah's nervousness grew. She hadn't been back since the auction 6 weeks ago. The humiliation of that day sat fresh in her memory standing on the platform, reduced to numbers, watching neighbors turn away. You all right? Luke asked quietly. Yes. Then more honestly, no, I'm not sure. We don't have to do this today. Can turn around right now if you want. The offer, sincerely made, strengthened her resolve. No. We need supplies. And I won't hide forever. Main Street was busy with Saturday commerce. Hannah felt eyes on them, immediately curious stares, whispered conversations behind raised hands. Luke seemed oblivious, helping her down from the wagon with matter-of-fact courtesy, lifting Eli to the ground. Morrison's first, he said. Get the dry goods ordered. The general store's bell chimed their entrance. Mrs. Morrison looked up from her ledger, surprise flickering across her face. The store held several other customers women Hannah recognized from church, from better days when she'd been James Cole's wife instead of the widow auctioned for debt. Mr. Bennett? Mrs. Morrison said carefully. Mrs. Cole? Morning, Luke replied evenly. Need to put in a supply order. And Mrs. Cole needs to look at winter cloth. The formal address, Mrs. Cole, not Hannah, was deliberate. Hannah realized, a public assertion of her status as a woman deserving respect, not property or servant. Mrs. Morrison caught it too, her manner shifting slightly. Of course. The cloth bolts are on the back wall. New shipment just came in from Denver. Hannah moved through the store with practiced efficiency, aware of the conversation stopping and starting around her. She selected practical wool in brown and gray, heavy cotton for undergarments, sturdy canvas for Eli's play clothes. Luke shadowed her quietly, Eli on his hip, his presence a shield against the worst of the stares. At the counter, as Mrs. Morrison cut the cloth, an older woman Hannah didn't recognize approached. Pardon me, she said, addressing Luke. Are you the gentleman who owns Sage Creek Ranch? I am. I'm Mrs. Garrett. My husband runs the bank now. We just moved from Colorado Springs. She smiled at Hannah. And this must be Mrs. Bennett. How lovely to meet you. The assumption hung in the air. Hannah felt Luke stiffen beside her, waited for him to correct the woman. The moment stretched, became significant. Pleasure to meet you, Luke said simply, neither confirming nor denying. Mrs. Garrett continued chatting about the town, the weather, the challenges of frontier life. Other customers were listening. Hannah knew, processing this interaction, this failure to correct the assumption. When Mrs. Garrett finally moved on, the store's atmosphere had shifted subtly. They completed their purchases: flour, coffee, salt, ammunition, lamp oil. Luke paid without comment, his face unreadable. As they loaded the wagon, Hannah caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't interpret. Lunch at the hotel, he suggested. Long ride home on empty stomachs. The hotel dining room represented a different level of public exposure. This wasn't necessary shopping, but chosen social engagement. Hannah understood what he was offering or challenging, perhaps. "If you like," she said. They were seated at a window table. Eli provided with a high chair that had seen better days. The waitress, young and unfamiliar, called Hannah Mrs. Bennett without question. Again. Luke didn't correct her. Halfway through their meal of beef stew and cornbread, Eli reached for Luke's coffee cup, knocking over the water glass in the process. The crash brought every eye to their table, in the confusion of cleaning up, mopping water, soothing Eli's startled tears. The moment happened. "Papa," Eli said clearly, reaching for Luke. "Papa, up!" The dining room fell silent. Hannah's face burned. It was the first time Eli had said it so publicly, so unmistakably. She started to correct him, to explain, but Luke was already lifting the boy, settling him on his lap as if this was routine, normal, accepted. "It's all right, son," Luke said quietly, but his voice carried. "Just water. No harm done." "Son." The word landed like a stone in still water, ripples spreading through the listening room. Hannah met Luke's eyes across the table, saw him watching her steadily, waiting for her response. She could correct it all, explain the arrangement, clarify their status, maintain the boundaries, or she could let the assumptions stand, let this frontier town write their own story about the widowed mother and the solitary rancher who'd claimed them. "Thank you," she said simply, to Luke, to the waitress, to the moment itself. The ride home was thick with unspoken things. Eli dozed between them, worn out from excitement. The purchased goods filled the wagon bed, testament to planning for a future, for winter, for permanence. Finally, 10 miles from town, Luke spoke. "I should have corrected them." "Why didn't you?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "Would have been a lie," he said finally. "Correcting them. Saying you're not. That we're not." "We're not," Hannah pointed out, though her heart was racing. "Aren't we?" He kept his eyes on the road. "I wake up looking forward to your coffee. Come in for lunch even when I've got food in my pocket, just to see you and the boy. Find myself whistling again, planning things, thinking about spring." He paused. "That's not nothing, Hannah." The use of her given name, rare from him, made her breath catch. "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not nothing." They completed the ride in silence, but it was different from their morning journey. This silence had weight, possibility, the shape of things unnamed but acknowledged. As they crested the ridge above Sage Creek Ranch, the late afternoon sun painted everything golden: the cabin, the barn, the cottonwoods by the creek. "Eli called me Papa," Luke said suddenly. "I'm sorry. I'll correct him." "Don't." The word came quick, almost harsh, then softer. "Unless you want to, unless it bothers you." Hannah thought about the man beside her who'd paid $500 for their freedom, who'd given them dignity along with shelter, who carved toys for her son and remembered she needed herbs for cooking, who'd held them all through a storm and let the town believe they were family. "It doesn't bother me," she said. That evening, after supper, after Eli was asleep, they sat in their usual chairs by the stove, but everything felt different, charged with the day's revelations, with possibilities acknowledged if not acted upon. Hannah tried to focus on her sewing, but kept losing count of stitches. Luke appeared to be reading, but she noticed he hadn't turned a page in 20 minutes. Finally, she set down her work. "Luke, what are we doing?" He closed the book, marking his place with unnecessary precision. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't plan this. Any of it. Didn't plan to stop at that auction. Didn't plan for you and Eli to become important. But we are important." He met her eyes then, direct and unflinching. "You know you are." The admission hung between them like a bridge partially built, waiting for someone to complete the span. Hannah felt the pull of it, the desire to step forward, to acknowledge what had been growing between them since the storm, perhaps since that first day when he'd counted out gold coins for strangers' freedom. "I can't," she said softly. "Not yet. It's too soon. Too fast. I don't even know if I'm capable of... after James. After everything." "I'm not asking for anything," Luke said quickly. "I'm just saying it exists. Whatever this is. And maybe that's enough for now." Hannah nodded, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. They returned to their evening activities, she to her sewing, he to his book, but the space between them hummed with new awareness, with patience, with the promise of conversations yet to come. Outside. The first snow of the season began to fall, silent and steady, covering the ranch in pristine white. Winter was arriving in earnest, and with it the long, quiet months when two damaged souls might find the time and courage to build something new from the ashes of their losses. The Garrison Mine representative arrived on a Tuesday morning in late February, his horse picking its way through the melting snow that spoke of winter's loosening grip. Hannah saw him first through the kitchen window, a thin man in a checked vest she recognized from the auction, his face bearing the satisfied expression of someone who believed he held winning cards. Luke was in the barn, fixing a harness. Eli played on the floor near the stove, building another of his elaborate block cities. The knock at the door was sharp, authoritative, the knock of someone who expected immediate compliance. Hannah dried her hands slowly on her apron, composing herself. 4 months had passed since the auction, and in that time, she'd found something she hadn't expected: peace, the daily rhythms of ranch life, the quiet evenings by the fire, Luke's steady presence, Eli's growing happiness. Now this man stood at the door like a reminder that peace was always conditional, always vulnerable to legal papers and men who traded in human debt. "Mrs. Cole," the man said when she opened the door, tipping his hat with mock courtesy. "Thomas Hartley, representing Garrison Mining Company. I believe we have business to discuss." "Mr. Hartley," she acknowledged, not inviting him in. "What business would that be?" "The matter of your contract." "Of course." He produced a leather folder, extracting papers with theatrical precision. "There's been some question about the legitimacy of the sale. Mr. Bennett paid well over the stated debt, which suggests possible coercion or irregularity in the transaction." Hannah felt her spine stiffen, the same steel that had kept her upright on the auction platform. There was no coercion. The sale was public, witnessed, and legal. "Perhaps, but the company has prepared a better offer." He smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "We're willing to pay Mr. Bennett $600 for the transfer of your contract. That's a $100 profit for him, and you'd be guaranteed good wages at our boarding house, much more secure than depending on the charity of a stranger." "Charity?" The word tasted bitter. "Is that what you call it?" "What else would you call it? Mrs. Cole? A man pays $500 for a woman and child he'd never met, either charity or..." He let the implication hang, ugly in the morning air. "That's enough." Luke's voice came from behind Hartley, quiet but carrying the weight of controlled anger. Hannah hadn't heard him approach, but he stood there now, filling the doorway, his presence suddenly dangerous despite his calm demeanor. "Mr. Bennett." Hartley turned, seemingly pleased. "Perfect timing. I was just explaining to Mrs. Cole about the generous offer. Get off my land." The words were soft, which somehow made them more threatening. Hartley's confidence faltered slightly. "Now, Mr. Bennett, there's no need for unpleasantness. This is a business proposition. $600 is considerable money. The contract was burned." The statement hung in the cold air. Hartley blinked, confused. "I beg your pardon?" "The contract. The bill of sale. Whatever you want to call that piece of paper that supposedly gave me ownership of another human being." Luke stepped past Hartley, positioning himself between the man and Hannah. "I burned it the day we arrived here, 4 months ago." Hannah's breath caught. She'd assumed the contract existed somewhere, a legal chain binding her even in this kind captivity. But Luke had destroyed it immediately, freed her in law as well as practice, and never told her. That's destruction of legal documents, Hartley sputtered. You can't just— I can and I did. Luke's voice remained level. Mrs. Cole is here of her own free will. She's free to leave whenever she chooses. She's also free to stay as long as she likes. What she's not is property to be traded between mining companies and ranchers, like cattle at market. The debt still exists. The debt was paid by me, to the legal satisfaction of the territorial court, with Judge Morrison presiding and a dozen witnesses watching. Luke took a step forward, and Hartley stepped back instinctively. Any claim you had ended when that gavel fell. Now get off my land before I help you off. Hartley's face had turned an unhealthy red. This is highly irregular. The company has rights. The company has nothing. Hannah stepped beside Luke, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You put me on that platform, tried to sell me like livestock. Mr. Bennett paid your price. The transaction is complete. But you're still here, Hartley pointed out, grasping for leverage, living with a man who's not your husband. What would the good people of Red Hollow think about that arrangement? What would they say about a woman who— They'd say she's making the best of difficult circumstances. Luke interrupted. They'd say she's working honestly, raising her son, contributing to a household. And if they said anything else, they'd answer to me. The threat was implicit but clear. Hartley looked between them, calculating, but whatever he saw made him step back. This isn't over, he said finally. The company doesn't forget debts. Mrs. Cole, or people who interfere with business. Mr. Bennett? Yes, Luke said simply. It is over. You're leaving now. And if you or any other company man sets foot on my land again, I'll have Sheriff Watson arrest you for trespassing. Are we clear? Hartley glared but turned toward his horse. As he mounted, he called back. You can't protect her forever, Bennett. And you, Mrs. Cole. You might ask yourself what kind of man pays $500 for strangers without expecting something in return. After his horse disappeared over the ridge, Luke and Hannah stood in the doorway, the cold air sharp between them. Eli had abandoned his blocks, sensing tension, and wrapped himself around Hannah's skirts. You burned it, Hannah said quietly. The contract. You burned it months ago. The day we arrived, Luke wouldn't meet her eyes. Before I even showed you your room. I never intended— You were never property to me. Hannah. Never. Why didn't you tell me? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, at first, I thought you'd leave immediately if you knew. You had no reason to trust me, to stay. Then later, he paused, struggling with words. Later, I hoped you stayed because you wanted to, not because you thought you had to. But I was afraid if I told you, if I made it clear you were free, you'd feel obligated to leave just to prove you could. Hannah absorbed this, understanding the tangled logic of it, the fear behind his silence. So I've been free this whole time. You've always been free. The only question was whether you'd choose to stay. And now, after what Hartley said about appearances, about what people think, Luke finally looked at her, direct and serious. I don't care what people think, but you might. You have every right to care about your reputation, your future. If staying here compromises that— Luke. She stopped him with his name. I need to tell you something. He waited, patient as always, while she gathered her thoughts. I knew, she said finally. Not about the burned contract, but about being free to leave. I've known for months. You made it clear in a dozen ways the wages you tried to give me that I refused, the way you asked rather than ordered, the door you never locked. I knew I could leave. But you stayed. I stayed. She took a breath, choosing honesty, At first for Eli, for shelter and food and safety, then for the peace of it, the daily rhythms, the sense of purpose. And then, she met his eyes, seeing in them the same guarded hope she felt in her chest. Then for you, for the way you are with Eli, for your quiet kindness, for the way you whistle when you think no one's listening, for the man who paid $500 to free strangers and never once acted like they owed him anything. Luke's expression shifted, something breaking open in it. Hannah, I need to say something. I should have said it weeks ago, maybe months ago, but I was afraid. I know, she interrupted gently. I know what you want to say, and I feel it too. But I need you to understand I'm not ready for promises or declarations. My heart is still learning to trust again, to believe in good things lasting. I can wait, Luke said immediately. I'm good at waiting. I've been waiting 4 years to feel anything besides grief. A little more time won't hurt. Hannah reached out, took his hand the first time she'd initiated such contact. His fingers were calloused, strong, gentle as they closed around hers. I'm not asking you to wait forever, she said. Just until spring, until the garden grows again, until I'm sure I'm choosing you and not just safety, not just gratitude. Spring, he agreed. When you plant Martha's herb garden, our herb garden, she corrected softly. It will be ours. From inside, Eli's voice rose in complaint about his abandoned blocks. The moment broke, but gently, naturally. Luke squeezed her hand once before releasing it. I should tell you, he said as they turned back inside. Hartley was wrong about one thing. I did expect something in return for that $500. Hannah stopped, wary. What? A chance, Luke said simply. Just a chance to not be alone anymore, to have voices in the house again, to remember what it felt like to have a reason to come in from the barn. He paused. You've given me that and more. Hannah Cole. Whatever happens come spring, you've already given me more than I paid for. They went inside together, to Eli's impatient demands and the warm kitchen and the life they'd built carefully over winter months. But something had shifted with Hartley's visit, with the revelation of the burned contract, with the words finally spoken aloud. That evening, as they sat in their accustomed chairs, the space between them felt different, not charged with tension but warm with acknowledged feeling, with patience, with the promise of spring. Luke was carving something new. Hannah noticed not a toy for Eli, but something smaller, more detailed. She didn't ask what it was, content to wait, to let things unfold in their season. Outside, the late February wind carried hints of change, of melting snow and softening earth. Spring was coming, and with it, decisions that would shape the rest of their lives. But for tonight, this was enough, the three of them safe in the lamplight, choosing to be here, choosing each other in whatever way they could manage. Eli played between them, building and rebuilding his block towers, creating his own small worlds while his mother and the man he called Papa built something larger, more lasting, one careful day at a time. Spring arrived with tentative fingers of warmth, melting the last stubborn patches of snow and coaxing green shoots from the dormant earth. Hannah stood in what had been Martha's herb garden, now overgrown with 4 years of neglect, and saw not decay, but possibility. The skeleton of the garden remained the raised beds, the stone borders, the southeastern exposure that would catch morning sun and shelter tender plants from harsh afternoon wind. Luke approached carrying a wooden crate. His sleeves rolled up despite the morning chill. Inside the crate were tools that hadn't been used in years, a hand cultivator, trowels, a watering can with only minor rust. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was something else, Martha's garden journal, the one he'd mentioned months ago but never produced until now. Found these in the shed, he said, setting the crate down carefully. Thought you might want to see her notes. Martha was particular about what grew where. Hannah accepted the journal with reverence, understanding the gift of it. The pages were yellowed but intact, filled with neat handwriting documenting planting dates, harvest yields, recipes for herbal remedies. Pressed between pages were flowers lavender, sage, rose petals their colors faded but still carrying faint scent. Chamomile here, she read aloud, where it gets morning sun but afternoon shade. Rosemary against the south wall for wind protection. She looked up at Luke. This is invaluable. Martha would have liked knowing someone was using her notes. He knelt beside the nearest bed, pulling at the dead vegetation. She always said a garden needed tending to stay alive, like most everything else worthwhile. They worked together through the morning, clearing winter's debris. Eli helped by carrying small piles of pulled weeds to the compost heap Luke had started. Though half the weeds ended up scattered along his path, Bear supervised from a sunny patch, occasionally investigating their progress. As the sun climbed higher, warming the earth and releasing the scent of sage from the hillside, Hannah found the seedlings Luke had started weeks ago in the barn: tomatoes, peppers, herbs she'd mentioned wanting. He'd been planning this, she realized, preparing for a spring garden even when winter still held the ranch in its grip. You started seeds, she said, unable to hide her surprise. You said you wanted to restore the garden. He didn't look up from where he was turning soil. Made sense to be ready. By noon, they'd cleared half the garden space. Luke had removed his coat, and Hannah could see the muscles in his back working as he dug, the way he moved with unconscious grace despite his size. She found herself watching more than working, then forced her attention back to the soil when he glanced her way. Eli had discovered earthworms, his delighted squeals bringing both adults to investigate his treasure. Luke knelt beside the boy, explaining how worms help the garden, their patient work underground making the soil rich. Hannah watched them, her son and this man who'd become his father in all but law, and felt her carefully maintained walls crumble a little more. Mama, look. Eli held up a particularly large worm. Papa says it's good. Very good. She agreed, meeting Luke's eyes over Eli's head. Something passed between them, warm and unspoken. They ate lunch on the porch: cold beef, fresh bread, early greens Luke had found growing wild by the creek. The sun was genuinely warm now, spring asserting itself with authority. Hannah felt drowsy with the pleasant exhaustion of physical work, the satisfaction of cleared earth ready for planting. We should plant today, Luke said, reading the sky with his usual expertise. Rain coming tomorrow, maybe day after. Good for settling new plants. They returned to the garden, working now with purpose. Hannah consulted Martha's journal, placing each plant according to the careful notes: lavender where it would catch breeze and spread its scent toward the house. Basil near the tomatoes Martha had noted they grew well together. Sage in the dry corner where other herbs might struggle. As she placed a rosemary seedling in the earth, pressing soil firm around its roots. Luke knelt beside her. Hannah, there's something I need to say. She kept her hands in the soil, grounding herself. Yes. Spring's here. You said to wait until spring. I did. He was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him choosing words carefully. I'm not good at speeches. Never have been. But I know what I feel, and I know what I want. He paused. I want you to stay. Not because you need to. Not because it's convenient or safe. I want you to stay because this feels like home when you're here. Because Eli calling me Papa doesn't feel wrong. Because I wake up looking forward to days instead of just enduring them. Hannah's hands stilled in the earth. She turned to face him, seeing the vulnerability in his weather-lined face, the hope he was trying to guard. I love you, he said simply. Not dramatically or desperately. Just steadily, surely, the way this ranch loves the creek constantly, quietly, naturally. I loved Martha that way too, and I thought I'd never feel it again. But here you are, and here it is, and I need you to know. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. but they weren't sad tears. "Luke, I'm not asking for everything all at once," he continued quickly. "I know you need time. Know you're still healing. I just needed to say it. To have it between us honest and clear." She looked at this man who'd saved her without trying to own her, who'd given her dignity along with shelter, who'd waited patiently while she found her footing. She thought of winter evenings by the fire, of his rare laughter at Eli's antics, of the way he whistled when he thought she wasn't listening. She thought of waking to his coffee, of the careful distance he maintained even when she wished he wouldn't, of his large hands gentle with her son. "I love you too," she said softly. "It happened so gradually I hardly noticed. Like spring coming after a long winter. But it's here now, and it's real, and it's not going away." His face transformed, the guarded hope breaking into something radiant. He reached for her hand, then stopped, his fingers covered in soil. "Your hands are dirty," she said. "So are yours." She looked down at her earth-stained fingers, then at his, and laughed, really laughed. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she took his dirty hand with her dirty hand, and they stayed there, kneeling in the garden, holding on to each other and to the moment. "Would you consider making this official?" Luke asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Our way, our time, not because anyone expects it or demands it, but because we choose it. You're proposing here in the dirt. Can't think of a better place. This is where things grow." She squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses, the strength, the tremor of nervousness. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. Luke Bennett, our way, our time." "Summer," he said immediately, "when the garden's in full bloom. We can do it here, at the ranch, with just Sheriff Watson to make it legal." "And Mrs. Morrison," Hannah added. "She was kind when others weren't." "And Mrs. Morrison," he agreed. Eli chose that moment to run over, clutching a handful of wildflowers he'd picked from the hillside. "Mama, Papa flowers." Luke lifted him up, settling him on his hip with practiced ease. "Beautiful flowers for your beautiful mama," he said, and Eli beamed. They spent the rest of the afternoon planting, but it felt different now, like they were planting their future along with the herbs and vegetables. Each seedling placed with purpose, with hope, with the knowledge that they'd tend this garden together through summer heat and autumn harvest and all the seasons to come. As evening approached, they stood together surveying their work. The garden looked raw, disturbed, the plants small and vulnerable in the vast space. But Hannah could see what it would become: the lavender spreading, the tomatoes climbing their stakes, the herbs spilling over their borders in glorious abundance. "It doesn't look like much now," Luke said, echoing her thoughts. "No," she agreed. "But it will. Given time and tending, it will." He wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. It was the first time he'd held her like this, casual and claiming, and she leaned into his warmth. "I can wait," he said. "For the garden, for summer, for whatever you need." "I know, but I'm done waiting." She turned in his arms, reached up to touch his face. "We've both waited long enough." He kissed her then, there in the garden with Eli playing at their feet, and Bear watching with dog approval, and the mountains catching the last light of spring's first truly warm day. It was a gentle kiss, careful and sweet, holding promises of all the kisses to come. When they finally went inside, the house felt different, not Luke's house where Hannah stayed, but their house, their home. Eli chattered through dinner about worms and flowers and the butterfly he'd seen. Luke and Hannah exchanged glances over his head, small smiles that held their secret, their promise, their chosen future. That night, after Eli slept, they sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the clear sky. Luke had brought out the rocking chair from the parlor, Martha's chair, unused for 4 years, and insisted Hannah take it while he sat on the bench beside her. "I'll make you your own chair," he said. "This summer, after the wedding. A new one, just for you. I don't need... I want to make something new for our new life." Our new life. The words settled over Hannah like a blessing. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Tell me about summer here," she said. "What should I expect?" He told her about long days and short nights, about wildflowers painting the meadows, about evening thunderstorms that rolled through the valley like trains. He told her about harvest and preserving, about preparing for winter together, about teaching Eli to ride when he was older. He painted a picture of their future in simple, practical terms that somehow made it more real than any grand declaration could. "It won't always be easy," he warned. "Ranch life never is. There'll be hard times, lean years maybe. I know, but we'll face them together." "Together," he agreed, and the words sounded like a vow. As they sat in comfortable silence, Hannah thought about the journey that had brought her here from the auction platform to this porch, from degradation to dignity, from desperation to chosen love. The path had been unexpected, marked by a stranger's impulsive kindness that had grown into something neither of them had anticipated. Tomorrow they would return to the garden, plant the rest of the seedlings, begin the patient work of tending and growth. But tonight, this was enough, the two of them choosing each other, choosing to build something from the ashes of their losses, choosing to believe that broken hearts could heal and bloom again like gardens after winter. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, blessing their small corner of the world where three souls had found each other and decided to become a family, not by law or obligation, but by choice, by love, by the simple daily act of showing up for each other. Summer would come with its promised wedding, autumn with its harvest, winter with its quiet intimacy. Years would unfold, bringing joy and sorrow in unknowable measure. But here, now, in the spring of their beginning, Hannah and Luke sat together and knew they would weather whatever came, rooted like the garden they'd planted, growing toward the light together. "You know, I've been thinking about Hannah and Luke's story long after telling it. There's something about the way gratitude works, not the simple thank you kind, but the deep recognition of grace when it appears in your life uninvited. Luke could have ridden past that auction, minded his own business. Hannah could have left the moment she learned the contract was burned, but they both chose to stay in that space of quiet thankfulness, letting it grow into something neither expected. That's what strikes me most, how family isn't always about blood or even promises. Sometimes it's about showing up when you don't have to. It's Luke teaching Eli to whittle, Hannah organizing a lonely man's larder, two broken people choosing to heal in each other's presence. They built their family from small acts of care, coffee waiting on the stove, mended shirts, carved toys, planted seeds. I think about Eli calling Luke Papa in that crowded store. How a whole life can pivot on such moments. Real gratitude doesn't demand repayment. It just keeps giving. Like Hannah giving Luke reason to whistle again. Like Luke giving Hannah the dignity of choice. Maybe that's how the strongest families form, not from obligation, but from the daily decision to be grateful for each other's presence. Building something beautiful from whatever broken pieces we carry.